Hey guys, this is W3C Ray, and today we want to look at a certain situation in MTG Poker, which happens quite frequently, that everyone did fall to the button. And we want to have a look into the button strategy. Of course, this is PKO related, so we look into a situation where the KOs are most likely at play, and most likely the KOs are at play at 20 big blinds effective and below. So we will have a look into a variety of situations where we can look into the introduction here. We will look into the situation when the button covers, and we will change the amount of the bounties of the blinds. So small blind bounty will increase, big blind bounty will increase, and vice versa. Then we will have a look into the situation where we are covered by both blinds. So we have 20 big blinds at the button, and we will look into the strategy from the button when we change our bounty. The third situation is that we will cover the big blind but not the small blind. So for example, we have 21 big blinds at the button. The big blind has 20 big blinds and the small blind covers us by a decent amount. What happens if we change our bounty at the button? What happens if we change the bounty in the big blind? And then of course we can switch this to we will cover the small blind, and big blind covers both players button and small blind. And in the end, of course, I give you a short summary. Alright, let's hop into that. On the left you can see the setup which I used. So here on the top we have the complete normal prize pool. It's 50k. I did regard a $100 PKO with a 20k start stack and so-called simplified payout, so I did not put a payout structure in, but I put everything on first place. The bounties are according what you know from a $100 PKO, so start bounty is $50 and you can win $25 if you knock out a player. And here you can see button has 40k chips, small blind has 20k chips, big blind has 21k chips. So button covers both, and big blind covers the small blind. And on the right side you can see the simulation result from the Monte Carlo simulation, which I did run here. And you can see that we are going into a kind of polar strategy, but we are missing out the top range when it comes to jamming. So first of all, you should notice, okay, VPIP here a decent amount, approximately 50% of all hands, and we are not jamming like anything from our good range. So no ace king, no ace queen, no aces, kings, queens, jacks, tens, etc. We are open raising all of them, and we are jamming like quite on the lower side. So we are jamming our offsuited aces, or some of our offsuited broadways, suited aces, low pairs. And this is also a theme which you will see later on in the simulations, that you will jam those like x9 suited hands, x8 suited hands at some frequency. And when you have a closer look at that, like how the button range is constructed here, it looks in terms of jamming quite like a vanilla strategy versus a 15 BB effective stack. And I will show you this in the next slide. So on the left side you have the button vanilla strategy, when the blinds have 15 big blinds and the button has, let's say, whatever, 30 big blinds or so. And if you compare the combos which are jammed from the vanilla strategy to the PKO strategy, where we jam for 22 big blinds effective, this really looks quite similar. Not in terms of open raising, but in terms of jamming. You have here the 9x suited hands in the vanilla strategy is jamming, also the low suited aces, the low pairs, the off suited aces, up to, let's say, ace jack, and the off suited broadways, and this really looks quite familiar. So what we can take as a first takeaway here is that we are playing against an effective stack when we have the PKOs, because the KO will be at play when the blinds are calling off the in, right? The KO is the additional equity in the pot. They're jamming effectively less, or calling effectively less against our open jam. So the 22 big blinds, which let's say the big blind is calling off, is not really a 22 big blinds? Yes, in chips, yes, but in dollar EV, not. It's only like 15 big blinds effective stack, which we are regarding because we have this additional value, this additional equity from the bounty in the pot. And so we play not only like way more aggressive, like we would play against a usual 22 big blind stack in the vanilla. We open raise more hands in the PKO. As you can see, our button is quite enlarged in the Queen X range and the Jack X range. We open the X6 suited hands, the X5 suited hands, and we jam like we would jam against the shorter stack. And this comes because the bounty will be at play if the stack will call off. So this is the first big takeaway, that we essentially look at the situation, see, okay, this is the additional dollar amount which will go into the pot, and then we will decrease our opponent's stack effectively and say, okay, instead of playing against like 20 big blind stack, 22 big blind stack, we're only playing against a 15 big blind stack. And then we choose our jamming range accordingly. So again, this looks quite like vanilla versus 50 BB effective, only that we also open raise a little bit more in the PKO case. So we VPIP here essentially 50%, and in the vanilla case we VPIP around 38-39%. So what is the reaction from the small blind if the button jams, and what is the reaction from the small blind if the button open raises? And you can see the small blind here on the left side versus jam calls off essentially like all ace-x down to ace-7, all suited ace-x, all pairs besides pocket deuces, and the suited broadways. And if the button opens, then you can see that small blind VPIPs like the very bottom of his equity, like 10-9 suited, queen 10, king 9 offsuit, the low pairs. That's actually here the case where the small blind is covered by the big blind. If you compare this again against the vanilla range, what small blind does against the jam from the button, and what small blind would do if he had 15 big blinds instead of 20 big blinds in the vanilla, this range again looks quite similar. So those two ranges are looking quite similar. So also the small blind reacts like he would play a vanilla with 15 big blinds instead of playing a PKO with 20 big blinds, if that makes sense. The small blind reacts against the button open jamming range as if he had a smaller stack, so he can broke more. Now we can have a look into the big blind calling range versus the button open jam and the small blind call against the all-in. And you can also see that's a quite linear wide range, and especially in the ace-x range it seems quite normal compared to vanilla. Also the pairs are seeming quite normal, but what we add is those multi-way equity hand. Those would be usually folds. So if we had a situation that the button open jams and we have a 15 BB small blind and a 15 BB big blind in the vanilla case, then without those multi-way hands, this would be like the overcalling range against an all-in in the call. But since we are in a PKO situation, and here the button covers the small blind, the button actually can add multi-way equity hands, which show decent equity in the multi-way all-in, because the big blind can win the small blind's bounty. So we call off here ace-x pairs and multi-way equity hands, and those we would usually leave out, not usually, we would leave them out in the vanilla case. What we can also say is, if we look into the ranges here for 20 BB, since PKO is still like heavily understudied, those are like very wide compared to what population would call off. So this would be the small blind calling range against the button open jam, and this would be the big blind overcalling range against the button open jam and the small blind all-in. So I would say that's a good spot to lock. So let's lock. Let's go with the usual rule of thumb. Let's take 10% of aces. So here in that case, I would exclude all hands which have an EV of 1.5 table equity or lower, and 1.2 table equity or lower, and exclude them from the calls. And same goes here for the small blind. Everything which is below 0.7 I would take out from the calling range and lock it. And if we do so, then the big blind response looks quite different. So on the right side we have the GTO solution, where both blinds are broken according to the equilibrium, and on the left side I did lock the small blind and the big blind response against the button open jam. So small blind calls tighter and big blind also calls tighter if the small blind already did call. This is the only note which I changed. And you can already see now the button strategy looks like quite different. Before we open jam 19%, it goes down to 13%, and we essentially add all of those combos into the open raise node. You can also see that we are going like into the like medium equity range when it comes to terms of broking, right? So we go again into the low suited aces, the low pairs, then suited king x, 8x suited, a little bit of the offsuited broadways, and we lower a little bit down in the offsuited ace x compared to the right solution. So we are not pushing ace 10 anymore, but we are pushing ace 9, and we are taking out a little bit of the offsuited Broadway range. So again, what you can note is there's like no balancing in the open jamming range. We are just taking the like mean of fold equity and raw equity if we are getting called, and those medium equity hands seem to fit like the game plan of the solver quite well. So we are not adding a hand like aces, kings, queens, jacks, or ace king for balancing into our open jamming range, but we are like only jamming like in the middle of our equity part. And then we are driving like it is kind of linear and kind of polar open raising strategy, since we have so much of our good hands in the open raising range, but we are adding like the very bottom, not into the jamming range, but into the open raising range also. So that's like quite polar. Either we have like a good hand or a good part of our range, or we have like a bad part of our range, right? And the medium part of our range is open jammed. Now we can change the bounty power from 1 to 2. So the situation which we did look at before, both blinds had the bounty power of 1. So they had let's say a starting stack and a starting bounty. And here in that case I did just lower the chips to 10k and 11k, so they had lost half of their starting stack and they still have their starting bounty. The rest of the simulation inputs are staying exactly the same, and we are looking now into the solution, and you can see already like quite a big difference compared to our strategy before. So our strategy before was like essentially like raise half of your range and jam half of your range, like rule of thumb, right? And now we are going really heavy into open jamming. So we are now jamming 37% of all times, and we're open raising 18% of all times. Also note that we are VPipping here a total of close to 56%, so way more compared to the usual vanilla open raising range which we would use. And here you can see that we are really driving a polar open raising strategy. So either we have a very good hand in this region, or we have a very bad hand in this region, right? And like every medium kind of equity hand which we can find, we just open rip. So a hand like 9-6 suited, or a hand like Queen 5 suited, or a hand like King 7 offsuit, we are just ripping. And everything which is like our defined bottom, let's say a hand like King 4 offsuit, a hand like 5-3 suited, we are open raising, and of course we are open raising now also our top part to balance this out. Now we can again look into the reaction of the small blind from if the small blind sees the button open jam. Small blind has here, you can see 20 BB effective with this small blind already put in the ante. And small blind again calls off like quite wide this 20 BB open rip. So he calls like essentially every pair besides deuces, he calls essentially any ace besides ace deuce, and then he calls quite linear in the king x in the queen x region. Before the small blind was a little bit tighter. Go back to the slide. You can see we are missing those combos here and also here, so according to our own bounty power we have even like a smaller effective stack, so we have to call off way more. Also like the open jamming range is now quite wide, or way wider from a button compared to the case where we had the bounty power of 1. So the small blind of course also overcalls more. And versus open raise, you can see that small blind actually does not develop like quite a significant calling range, like it was in the Bounty Power 1 case. He still rejams essentially any hand he wants to VPip. Yeah, you can add like a little bit at the bottom, but yeah, essentially like the vibe of the solve is if you want to VPip, you go all in. Now, what is the big blind response against the button jam and the small blind call of the all-in? You can see also the big blind now goes way wider compared to the case before. Before we had like this region, so this additional like multi-way equity region, and now we add the 7x suited part, part of the 6x suited part, and yeah, so like this also this like theme we want to have multi-way equity. This also continues from Bounty Power 1 to Bounty Power 2. Now both of the stacks of the small blind and the big blind are effectively even lower, and the big blind covers the small blind, so has an incentive to go in and win the bounty, and therefore he enlarges his range and happily hops into this all-in pot. If you want to have like a stable range, and a good like rule of thumb, if bounties are getting a little bit more significant, so if the bounty power is not 1 but let's say 1.5 or 2, you can develop a stable range by just looking into the EVs, which I did here on the right side. And you essentially like very often get kind of an arrow, because on the right side you will add like those suited multi-way hands, and on the left side you would add parts of ace-x and your off-suited broadways to broke. So you have the pairs, let's say 5s plus, and then you have your good suited multi-way. We can make some money hands, probably even add like 10-9 suited, king 9 suited, right? So like the border is obviously like a little bit fluent depending on how you perceive how the button play is and how you perceive like the small blind will react. But essentially, yeah, that's your stable range. Say like 8-7, a7 suited plus, ace-9 offsuit plus, and then 5s plus, and add some of the offsuited broadways and good multi-way suited equity hands on the right side. Now again, we can say this is not realistic. In the GTO case, like the overcalling range is too wide from the small blind and from the big blind, so this is the small blind overcalling range again, quite wide for 20 big blinds effective. He calls like king 8 and queen 10 off, and I don't think this is like very realistic. Also cannot see him broking like ace 5 off with like an uncapped range behind in the big blind just to go for it against the button open jam, like not often enough at least. And the big blind also seems with the 30% calling against button open jam and SP call the all-in seems like very right. So also it seems like quite of an understudy spot, so I think people will be quite honest and probably call off this range. And so I did again, like I did before, set 10% of aces EV rule and just did lock the ranges of the small blind and big blind, and then see what the reaction of the button is. And I already did spoil it like a minute before, but yeah, you can see again we're going into the very heavy raising strategy. We don't want to chase out the blinds, and like the additional fold equity which we get from jamming, which is a nice benefit for the medium equity hands, is now going like too often away to yeah, make up for all the situations where we can actually enter the pot against 1 or 2 players with our pot with our top range, and then like get them to broke on structure XY, and we have our good range, we have our top range, we have our king queen suited, whatever. So the vibe is like quite the same. We want to VPip even more. Like before we had like 55%, and now we are VPipping close to 60% from the button. Again, remember against like 20 PV stacks, so that's way wider in the PKO compared to the vanilla. And again, it's the same vibe. Like we take the medium equity hands of our range and we jam this, and like king 5 suited, queen 6 suited, or ace 6. But since we want to VPip so much more, we go even more linear and like open hand like queen 9 and jack 7, and go even more down in the offsuited king x to open, offsuited 7x here to open, since we want to really enter the pot and play post flop against the players in the blinds. So if we want to now compare EVs with open raising and open jamming, we find that like some combos are like really indifferent between jamming and open raising, and like most of the combos are going like one specific direction. And I only show you like the combos which are going the specific direction in terms of jamming, which I also would recommend that you should jam. So on the left side you have the GTO solution, where this is the button, as you can see, the button open jam, effective auto jam against the 22 big blinds in the big blind. And here you can see that it's like way more plus EV for the bottom combos here to jam compared to open raise, right? Everything here else is more or less like in between, like pocket nines is like a little bit tending more to jam, but it's whatever. And like a hand like Jack 10 suited is a little bit more incentivized to open raise, but it's like also like, yeah, it's probably the border where I would consider, okay, that's way better. And here for the suited ace X, the suited king X, and the suited queen X at the very bottom, it's way better to jam, and also for the offsuited aces and also for the pairs here compared to open raising pre-flop. And now if you switch it to the blinds are not calling enough against the jam, you're looking again into the EVs, you can see that still those hands are preferred as a jam. So you can see that like not open raising is the best way to play, or at least like at the border, which I defined in my head, which is like 0.04, 0.05. Here you can see like still the bottom king X is a better jam, the bottom queen X is either whatever or a better jam, and the bottom ace X also in the suited range, like either whatever or a better jam. Same goes for the pairs. So those are the medium equity hands. I would define them as the medium equity hands. They're staying like quite okay against an all-in, against a call from all-in, right? But they are like not great. So this is the stable range, I would say, which you always want to rip in the case that both blinds are having 20, let's say like 20-ish BB, and have a significant bounty. Now we are flipping the situation and looking into what differs if small blind now covers the big blind compared to big blind did before cover the small blind. And on the right side we have the solution from before, that you essentially only VPIP by rejamming against the open raise, or you essentially fold. You have some small combos which you can call against the non-all-in VPIP from the button, but those are like quite rare. And on the left side you can see that you not only develop now a significant calling range, which is 11%, which is even higher than in a vanilla. Vanilla is for 20 BB, I think it's like 8% or so. But you will also like add more combos compared to the case on the right side. So you will add here in the 8x suited range, you will add in the suited queen X range, and you will call more of your suited king X. You will balance this a little bit out with your aces and with your ace 8, ace 9 pairs, which you will then broke if the big blind jams. And also you have a higher incentive, of course, now to enter the pot. If the button opens, we call on the small blind, big blind calls. We can play a multi-way pot where we probably can win the bounty from the big blind. So that's like quite a bit change in terms of strategy, like how small blind will react if he covers the big blind or not. Overall, the jamming range in the small blind is quite stable around the offsuited ace X, the offsuited broadways, and like top range we exclude aces. Probably sometimes we want to exclude kings, depending on how like the dynamics of the spot. Well, we perceive the player, the button we perceive the player, and the big blind. We can of course like put in some more traps if we want to. So this is what I wanted to note here. Small blind develops a significant flatting range compared to the vanilla case. We add even more combos and want to enter the pot and play post flop. Now for the case that the button covers both players, the quick takeaways here. First, we will choose kind of a vanilla open raising range according to the effective stacks of the blinds. So the blinds here in this simulation had 20 and 22 big blinds, and we did only change the bounty power. And depending on the bounty power, the blinds have an effective lower stack if we jam. So if we jam, they call. there's additional bounty in the middle, and so the equity which we need to jam is lower. And so we can also see this as if they had a smaller stack, and we will choose our open jamming strategy according to which stack they have. So here in this case they have a 15 BP stack instead of a 20 BP stack. The SP will respond with this vanilla range and his effective stack. So if the button open jams and the small blind is covered by the big blind, and of course by the button, then he will react with the vanilla range if he had 15 big blinds and not 20 big blinds, and he will broke according to this. So his calling range will be way wider because, of course, yeah, the button range is also wider from the first place, from the all-in, and he will react to this by also broking lighter. Then we did lock, and if both blinds are overfolding versus the jam, button again goes very heavy into a raising strategy and only jams his bottom, like the offsuited ace-x and the pairs, the low-suited king-x and queen-x. And with bottom, I mean like the bottom medium equity hands, not the bottom, right? So the bottom was like 5-3 suited. And the lower the bounty power of both blinds get, then the lower the jam frequency is of king-x and queen-x holdings. If the small blind covers the big blind, then small blind develops a significant calling range compared to vanilla, which is like, let's say, 7-8% for 20 BB effective, and now we develop like 50% more combos. It goes up to 11-12%, which we want to call in a PKO. And small blind calls there then his low pairs and adding a bunch of like suited queen-x and 8-x suited hands, which he then puts into the calling range so he can enter the pot and play post-flop. Alright, this was the first part where button did cover both players. Now we will change the situation and button is covered by both players. So button has 20 big blinds, both blinds are covering the button, and we want to compare the strategy if we have a small bounty or small-ish bounty with a bounty power of 1 and a bigger bounty with a bounty power of 2. So how does our strategy look like? And first thing of note is if we have a bounty power of 1, which is on the left side, then we go into a normal raising strategy. Probably miss out some of the button open raises, but like this looks like quite normal. We are jamming here in the offsuited ace-x range, and in the offsuited Broadway range we jam the low-suited aces and our lowest pairs. And if we increase our bounty power to a bounty power of 2, so we have, let's say, a starting stack and 2 starting bounties, or starting stack, half of a starting stack and a starting bounty, then yeah, we go into a very heavy open jam strategy. So we will still open raise our like aces, kings, queens, and we will add a little bit here in the like weakest equity hands we have in our open raises, like jack 9 or queen 8, and everything else like we rip. So we are ripping here good bunch, 20% of all times, and 10% of all times we open raise. What you can notice, of course, is that our total VPIP is like decreasing drastically. We are only like VPIPing a total of 30% here with a bounty power of 2 and 20 big blinds on the button. So that is quite different compared to the vanilla. We lose a lot of VPIPing range, only opening 30% with bounty power of 2. And we are playing now according to our effective stack if our bounty would be at play. So we are choosing a range compared to like our effective stack. When we are sitting on the button with 20 BB in a PKO and both blinds are covering us, we are playing as if we would have a 17 big blind stack. The higher the amount of our bounty becomes, the more we jam from our opening range, and we will add more and more high cards to this jamming range. So we like, the higher our bounty gets, the more we add high cards. We want to block the top range, and we have okay-ish good equity if they call our all-in. Now we can have a look into the situation where we will cover one player. So this is now the third part of the presentation. Button has, let's say, 21 big blinds here in this case. The big blind has 20 big blinds in this case, and the small blind has 40 big blinds. So the small blind is covering both players, and the button is covering the big blind. And now we can just change the bounty powers of the button and the big blind, so the two bounties which can be effectively at play at some point. And we will look into like how the solver will change the strategy. And if solver changes the strategy, yeah, he changes the strategy, spoilers ahead. So first situation here is the start situation where the button has a bounty power of 1 and the big blind also has a bounty power of 1, so both have like the low bounty, quote unquote. And we can see that again we are jamming in the off-suited ace-x range in the low pairs and the low-suited ace-x, and then besides that we are repipping, I would say, like quite normal, right? So this looks like a normal button opening raising range with the stack size of 20 bigs. And if we increase the bounty power from 1 to 2 for both players, so now the big blind has a significantly higher bounty, so if he calls all in, we will play for a significantly higher portion of the prize pool, and so the equity lowers, which we need to make this profitable, right? And then you can see we will essentially close to double our range, which we are open jamming. So we flip a lot of the combos which we would VPIP by non-all-in before and put them into the all-in range. Like most of the off-suited aces, more broadways, more pairs, more suited aces than the in-between medium equity hands, Jack 10 suited, Queen 9, King 8, those kind of hands, we'll put into the jamming range, so we go into a more jam-heavy strategy. So this is not the most all-in situation which you can find where the most frequent all-in is happening compared to a whole strategy. This would be that one. So here the button has a bounty power of 2 and the big blind has a bounty power of 1. Meaning, for example, both have a starting stack, but the button already won 2 bounties, so now he has 2 start bounties on his head. And you can see we go into a very heavy open jam strategy here, going polar in our open raises, taking aces, kings, ace, king suited, and then add like the lowest equity hands which we can find, like parts of them at least, and the rest we are just jamming. So our VPIP again drops down to 33% approximately here, and yeah, we go into essentially like not jam only, but we are very selective in which kind of hands we want to open raise. And of course we want to set like some traps in our open raising range with our like good very top range, and then since we have those we can add like the very bottom, which we definitely want to see a flop with. And if we switch this around, so if now the button has the bounty power of 1, so star stack starting bounty, in the big blind has the bounty power of 2, so start stack and has already won 2 bounties, then you can see a complete flip in the strategy. Not only that we VPIP now 43% instead of 33%, so we add a 10% VPIP. We're going very heavily into the raising strategy and again jamming like the medium equity hands where we are good with like, okay, if we are getting called we have okay equity, and if they fold it's nice we get this fold equity through. So we have the off-suited ace-x, the broadways, the small pairs, and the small suited aces again as our stable range, which we like quote unquote more or less always want to jam. We can compare this to vanilla and again reaffirm that we play kind of how we would play with our effective stack. So here on the button we have the bounty power of 1 and the big blind has the bounty power of 1, so the lowest possible bounties which we can win in the simulation setup we did choose. And if you compare this is the button strategy for the PKO. The button here has 20 big blinds, right? So you can see he has actually 21 big blinds. And here on the right, this is a vanilla strategy for a 17 big blind button open strategy. We have just 17 big blinds in the vanilla MTT. And again, this looks like quite similar, right? So we choose like quite the same combos to open jam. Like we choose part of the 9x range, we choose the small pairs, we choose the low suited aces, and we choose the off suited aces and the off suited broadways as a rip, and the rest via VPIPing by open raising. And we open raise a little bit more, like in the suited king x and the suited queen x, like a little bit more blocker-ish we are open raising. Because we want to enter the pot and play for the bounty from the big blind, since we covered the big blind here. But besides of that, like the first like the first important note before we start like playing the hand is, okay, we have to realize, okay, we are playing our effective stack, and our effective stack is like our stack which we have, but lowered by the possibility that someone can win the bounty. And so we are changing our strategy to, we would play like a slightly smaller stack. Like I think this bridge is like easier to connect if you multi-table and play vanillas and PKOs mixed, right? That if you're sitting at the button, you see, okay, the small blind is covering me, I cover the big blind, I enter the pot with my starting stack and starting bounty, okay, I play effectively like with a little bit of a smaller stack in terms of strategy, and I choose my strategy according to this new effective stack. Takeaways. If we have this like highest bounty power in the formation, we go into a heavy jam strategy, jamming essentially our entire range, circling around ace-x, broadways, and pairs. We will exclude the top range like aces, ace, king, kings, probably sometimes queens, and then we add the lowest equity V pips like 10-9 suited. If the big blind has the highest bounty power in the formation, then we go into a heavy open raise strategy, and we're only jamming the bottom pairs, low suited ace-x and medium off-suited ace-x. So again, like our medium equity stable range, we rip because we are good with either outcome. Either we're getting called and we have decent equity, or we take the fold equity, we are good at that. But we want to VPIP a big range, so, or like a high frequency, and so we have to add like a lot of our good hands into the open raising range, and then we can also add a lot of like medium till weak equity hands, which we definitely want to VPIP because we want to enter the pot with the big blind. Third, if the button and the big blind have like a lower bounty power, we go into the vanilla strategy according to our effective stack, which already regards that the bounties are at play when we are all in. This is the point which I like really stress in this presentation a lot, so that you like have the mindset, have like this strategic note in your head that your stack is effectively a little bit lower, and so you would change your strategy according to what would be your actual stack size. Now we can just flip the player, which we do cover. Before it was the big blind, so the player which is last to act, and now we can switch it to the small blind. So small blind has 20 big blinds, button has 21 big blinds, and now the big blind covers us with like 40 or 50 big blinds or whatever. And we just look into the strategy if this changes anything. And because there's an uncapped range behind which covers us both, the button strategy is actually like really untouched by the bounty power of the small blind. So our strategy does not change if we increase the bounty of the player, which we do cover. And yeah, you can see this here. I did change the bounty power from the small blind from 1 to 2, and the strategy essentially stays the same. Yes, we want to VPIP a little bit more, tiny touch more, but besides of that, we essentially still play the 17 big blind vanilla strategy here. We are jamming our off-suited aces, broadways, low-suited aces, low pairs, like the stable range. So yeah, that's a spot where you don't have to bother, like the solver says you that you don't have to bother that much about the small blind going in, because there's an uncapped range behind and he will play like quite honest. Yeah, that's it for today, guys. Hope you did enjoy the presentation. Wish you good luck at the tables, and bye bye, take care.